right, it's that woo woo. We are back with another reflection on the Daily Vedantic, and that woo woo, that is a shout out to all the OG YouTubers out there that remember that video with the car whistlers. It's that woo woo with, what was that guy's name? Bub Rub. With Bub Rub. And that's actually somewhat relevant to the episode today, which is all about the role of community in our lives. And this is a bit unintuitive for many of us that grew up here in the West, and many of us that just have not spent that much time reflecting on the role of community in our lives. Within the philosophy of Vedanta, community is critical in our path. But it's not the community you might think of when I say community. You might imagine just a group of people. But we touched on this in an episode recently, and I wanted to build this thought out a bit more. First, we're going to start with, where's the priority of community in our development, our progress? And this question brings a story to mind. The story of two followers approaching the Buddha and asking him, what's most important? The Buddha, you, the teacher, Dharma, the teaching, or Sangha, which is a Sanskrit word for community and truth. Vedantic version of Sangha is satsang, but they mean the same thing. They're both Sanskrit words, and the beauty of Sanskrit is they might have 12 words for the same thing. Or one word can mean 20 different things, like the word Dharma, and it depends completely on the context of the word. But these two followers asked, what's most important, you, the teaching, or community? And as the story goes, without hesitation, the Buddha said, community. Sangha is most important. Which is so curious to us, because if you're like me, you grew up thinking, well, the teacher is the most important. Socrates is more important than what he taught. That's secondary to the teacher, the mouthpiece. Then secondary to him is his teaching, or a great philosophy teacher near university, a great physicist. It is about them and their Nobel Prize that then gives elevation to their work and what they're teaching, that discipline. And the community of students, the community around that teacher on college campuses, that seems so unrelated to what's most important, the teacher or what's being taught. But as the story goes, like I said, there was no hesitation. Sangha, community and truth. That's the better definition for Sangha is community and truth. Satsang, same thing, community and truth. That is more important than the teacher or the teaching. So that sets the stage for how important, right, community is. That community and truth. Community of people seeking the truth and fostering that pursuit within each other. We all know this in our lives. Spending a decade in Silicon Valley, I saw how powerful community was for driving towards goals when everybody else was thinking, obsessing, and reflecting on the same types of things. When people could be amazing mirrors for reflecting back on what you were building, great influences positively. Some of them, it would just be out of envy or jealousy that I'd push myself further. But that community we see that in many parts of our lives, how helpful a community pointed towards a similar goal can be. It could be the same for your church group, could be the same for your coworkers, your office. But that aspect of a communal goal and a group that is bound with similar pursuits, it's nothing groundbreaking. But for it to be so important that it's even more important than the teaching, then you really have to think, why would it be more important than the teaching? Well, that community might just be you and the environment that you're in. No matter how strong of a mental fortitude you might have for your morning reflection or your morning study for an hour, if you go out into the world to a community that is going to infect you with attachment, with more greed, with envy, making you feel like not only are you not enough, but that study is an impediment to what you should be pursuing. That will, for many of us, for the vast 99.9% of us, that will erode our pursuit, our resolve, if everyone around us is trying to replace that pursuit with something else. But one part that is often left out about this community, and something that is underscored within the philosophy of Vedanta, is community is more than just the people around you. That community in truth, that is the TV that you watch. That is the social media that you consume. The books that we read. All of this, the culture that we surround ourselves with. And today, everything is a few taps away from a devolved culture, but equally powerfully, everything is a few taps away from a positive culture. You can set what you're going to see on YouTube. You can set what you're going to see on social media. Take some effort up front, but you can set what is sent to you from these resources. You obviously can choose which people you want to spend your time with most of the time. You can choose which company to work for, which coworkers you want to be around. These are deliberate choices to surround yourself with a culture that is pursuing the truth. That is not only different from the teacher and teaching being the most important in many of our conventional viewpoints, with the community pursuing that same truth being even more important in that potentially apocryphal story of these two followers approaching the Buddha. But secondly, it's really unique that the community is way more than just the people around you. It gets down into the foods that we eat, the habits that we create for ourselves. It's the culture we surround ourselves with. That is a second unique thing about this viewpoint on community and satsang, community and truth specifically. There is the opposite, dosang, which is community of the false, which is the community that convinces you that X, Y, or Z that you right now know isn't good for you, is not going to help you find a life of peace and prosperity, but they convince you that those things, X, Y, and Z, whatever those are for you, are great, are amazing, are what you should be doing, or what we should be as a group doing on a Friday night, Saturday night. The text threads around things that just, they aren't great things to reinforce in our lives. That's dosang, community of the false. Not saying you have to leave those communities, not saying you have to sever ties with those friends, but you can see them for what they are. See the end and the beginning of too much time spent with that group. Too much of an acculturation of that group around your life is going to lead to, many different pointers to the false instead of towards the true. But you could also be a positive influence for that group. And many of them might be yearning for something positive. Something as simple as, I'm going to stop at 2 drinks. Or something as simple as, man, I just love getting up early and not feeling like total S. So I'm going to head home after 9. Those little positive influences can have massive effects on those around us. But in that satsang group, that community that is pointed towards the true, that is a third aspect that makes that really unique in our lives. Is that all of those things that you surround yourself with, that culture that you surround yourself with, pointed towards the truth, pointed towards the higher, pointed towards where you want to be. Those things end up reorienting the patterns of our thoughts. They reorient the patterns of our speech. They reorient the patterns of the culture that we consume. They are like these mirrors, 19 mirrors, showing back at us where we have work to do or the path that we can take to get to where we want to be. In the philosophical sense, in the same way that finding great mentors might get you where you want to be professionally. Finding great coaches might get you where you want to be if you're training for a sport. This is very similar. And these communal reinforcements happened throughout the day. Not just in the time you've carved out in the morning, but throughout the day. Do you all know how large language models work for this new revolution within artificial intelligence? Companies like OpenAI or Anthropic, they use what are called large language models. And what does artificial intelligence have to do with large language models? Well, I'll give you the simplified breakdown of how these large language models work. So the AI that we interact with today, it is conversational in nature. You write a question to it, gives you an answer. It can ask you questions back. You can actually, now in many of the platforms, you can have a verbal conversation with your voice with them. But how they work and how they were developed. About 7 years ago, OpenAI pioneered this new model to train these conversational AI agents by taking massive amounts of data. Football fields on football fields on football fields. Imagine 10 football fields of data trained on things that humans are already writing on the web. From Amazon reviews to Reddit threads to social media posts, taking all of that data, what humans were producing, in a day, what we were producing for 500 years prior to the year 2000, we are producing every day online. And it would take all of that data over years, many years, and create this formula, this equation. 10 football fields worth of data center processing over many years would then inform this formula, this equation that would fit on a thumb drive. If you just look at it in English, it has multiple languages, but if you just look at it in English, it's about 4 gigabytes, easily fits on a thumb drive. And what does that formula do? That formula takes everything that all of us as humans have been writing for years and years and years, and it forms a predictive model where it can predict what should the next word be for any given sentence. And again, this is an oversimplified synopsis of how this technology works, but it is accurate. These large language models, predict what should be the next word for, let's say you ask, what is something fun to do with a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old on a Saturday in Los Angeles? It will say, well, something fun that you could do with a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old in Los Angeles. Repeat back the question to you. Then it will predict what should the next word be. Maybe it's the word could. Then what should the next word after that be? Could be. And the next word could be a hike in the Santa Monica Mountains. And each time it's generating a word, it's just saying, well, with 99.9999999% accuracy, this is probably the next word that fits here. It has no understanding of what it's saying. It has no conscious nature to what it is generating in terms of the words and conversation it's having with you. It's just using all of its predictive modeling to say, what should the next word be? Why is this all relevant? Why is Bub Rub relevant to satsang? Well, the community we surround ourselves with, the culture, the media, the YouTube videos, the podcasts we listen to, they help build new or reinforce old models. If you're building towards a new model, it helps build towards a different predictive set of words or actions or thoughts for us to have. When we consume these things, let's say you consume dramatic thrillers, murder mysteries at night. Well, when something happens in your life, you hear a sound. Late at night, as you're going to bed, downstairs in your house, what is that first thought that comes to mind? The culture we have surrounded ourselves with, that informs what is that next thought. When you think, man, I'm feeling like I'm in a funk, what is the next thing I should do? What community, what culture have you surrounded yourself with that's going to feed that thought of what you should do next? Is it reach for a drink? Is it go on social media? Is it a podcast you listen to about the phenomenal effects exercise can have on mood? We all have these predictive models in our minds. And not only does this example tell us we should watch every word that we say, because whatever we say is going to reinforce the pattern of language for what we're going to say an hour later, maybe a year later. But it also says we should mind everything that we watch. The previous episode on this was guard the gate. Guard that gate of what we let in to our minds. What information, knowledge we let in to develop our intellects, our capacity to see the end in the beginning. And then all of this is critical. It's one of the most important things that's worth repeating over and over and over again around having that community and truth established around us. And like I said, luckily with the tools we have online, probably with the device you're watching this very episode with, or listening if it's on a podcast player. Phenomenal device to shift that culture. Doesn't have to be radical, but start nudging those algorithms towards that which will develop you, towards the truth. And over time, that shift ends up being a phenomenal satsang. Independent of, you might be 10,000 miles away from an ashram. You might be 10,000 miles away from anyone else that listens or watches a YouTube episode like this. But it is just a few clicks away from the world we live in today. And that satsang, a community in truth, is also just a few clicks away from the world we live in today. That is today's episode on the Daily Vedantic. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Daily Vedantic. This reflection is part of a free repeating 2-year course in Advaita Vedanta. Rooted in the timeless wisdom of the Upanishads, arguably the oldest philosophical texts on earth, you can begin with episode 1, which gives the 15-minute overview of the whole philosophy of Vedanta, or you can join the journey with any episode at any point. But the critical aspect of this course, of understanding and mastering anything, is to study and reflect, even for 10 to 15 minutes on the timeless each day, preferably at the start of your day. As is said in this philosophy, reflection is 100,000 times as powerful as listening. So listen, journal, sit with, discuss these concepts, or ask questions at thedailyvedantic.com with our AI-powered chatbot, informed by about 700 episodes here, as regularly as one can, if you want to see clarity and peace almost effortlessly unfold in your daily life. And if it doesn't result in a near immediate increase in clarity and peace, then toss aside and feel free to never listen again. One of the things that you might notice is after 7 or 8 days in a row, This doesn't feel like a discipline. This feels like a visit with a best friend to dive into the timeless with daily reflection. Within a few days, it becomes one of your favorite parts of the day. You can also find out more, including news about in-person events in Los Angeles and beyond, at the Daily Vedantic on Instagram or through our weekly newsletter at thedailyvedantic.com. Additionally, check out the links in our show notes for more resources like the books that are mentioned most frequently in the episodes, including Vedanta Treatise, perhaps the simplest and most straightforward read on this philosophy I've ever come across. Until next time, and from the entire team that works on the Daily Vedantic project, thanks for listening.